They might be self-aware.
Welcome to another episode of They Might Be Self-Aware, episode 42, where we will finally discover the meaning of everything. I am Hunter Powers, joined by
Daniel Bishop, as always.
Hey, Daniel, how goes it?
It's going really well. Yeah, it is going really well, though I do have a question, and I think this question might be a question that all of our viewers and listeners and readers might even have. Someone's probably reading this.
We do publish a transcript. Yeah. They're really bad because, they're AI generated, right? And they are not from the source material by a mile for a number of reasons, which I guess we could get into at some point. So there's a lot of there are a lot of issues with those transcripts, but they are aspirationally, generally kind of, they'll steer you in the right direction. I think.
I want to hear about why they're not from the source audio, but we'll talk about that another time.
I may hide a few Easter eggs in those transcripts.
Ooh. Well, now I have to read all of our episodes.
42 of them.
There's only 2 episodes? Wait, 42. This is episode 42.
There are
42. Okay. Yeah. Well, the question I have for you, and that all of our listeners, watchers, and readers might have, is who are you?
Who are your father, and what does he do? Is that the Arnold Schwarzenegger quote?
Right. Who is your daddy?
Who is your daddy?
No, who are you, Hunter?
Oh,
I know you're Hunter Powers, and you're the co-host of They Might Be Self-Aware, the wildly popular AI podcast.
Technically chief recording officer.
Sorry, chief recording officer of the wildly popular They Might Be Self-Aware AI podcast.
Oh yeah.
But who are you? Who's Hunter? What's his whole deal?
I mean, I have the answer that I give in interviews.
Yeah.
Which is like the canned answer. Oh, I guess we could start there with the canned answer.
Let's open the can. Let's hear your origin story.
A good origin story.
Yeah.
What do I usually say? I usually say that and this is true. I feel like this isn't just
this is what I tell interviewers. Yeah. This is true.
At least half of what I tell interviewers is mostly true.
Right.
No.
Depends on how hard you squint.
I'm a lifelong technologist. They put me into programming classes when I was 3.
Wow.
And I never left. When you're 3, you can't even really read and write. So maybe people were like, meh. So we were on a very old, well, they were not very old at the time, Apple IIs. We were using the Logo scripting language. If you're familiar from those eras, the turtle, moving the turtle around the screen. Yeah. And our teacher would print out scripts, again, to move the turtle around, draw shapes, change the backgrounds, put text on the screen. And we would copy them from the piece of paper into Logo and then run them. And I would get into competitions with my friends to see who could build the longest, coolest script. And that
make the turtle do some really fun stuff.
Really fun stuff.
Yeah.
And that was the inception moment. And I was hooked from them then and never really turned around. I usually the next point out when I was
Turtles All the Way Down, which is not a
it literally is
42 type references today. It's not Douglas Adams, but still.
When I was around 12, this was around the time that the electronic greeting cards started becoming popular. I don't know if you remember that. Like Blue Mountain was a very popular company at that time. And my relatives were catching on to this trend and sending me these electronic greeting cards for holidays. And I didn't like this. They thought they were cool and hip, and they're like, I'm using the technology. But when I used to get greeting cards in the mail, they had $5 bills in them, and now I'm getting this animated thing on my computer that I didn't want in the first place. But I had the idea of, what if you could have the convenience of email, but still the personal touch of a real card? And my parents weren't very technical, but they were always super supportive, and so they allowed me to pursue this idea, and I set up a site. I built everything from scratch. It was what is, I guess, now referred to as classic active server pages, classic ASP. It was active server pages with an access database. So built in the e-commerce stores called Go to Cards, where you could go and pick out a card, type your message, and it would get printed out in a handwritten font. I had a credit card terminal. My security was I would store half of your credit card number in my very insecure Access database, and the other half I would email to myself, and then I would just combine them. And it did work. And that was my first sort of, I don't know, business intro thing. And that ended up getting featured on this television show.
That was cards. So you getting those cards that you didn't like, that really was like the genesis of.
Yeah, I needed my money.
Company.
I was looking at the bank account. The bank balance was going down. I need to turn this thing, ship around at 12. That ended up getting featured on this television show called Good Morning Carolina. I was in North Carolina at the time. And it was no technical marvel, as cute kid entrepreneur story sort of a thing.
Right.
But afterwards, the meteorologist came over and was like, hey, that was pretty cool. I'm trying to build this thing. I want to put cameras on all of the beaches so the surfers can check out the waves. Yeah. And, we'll monetize it with ads. Would you be interested in working on that? I'm like, yeah. And that company, which still exists today, it's called Surfchex with an X. I would work there for the next, I think it was like 3 years. They paid me $200 a week, which when you're 12 is like infinite money. I was like,
massive.
I was like, how does anyone ever need more than $200 a week? And built a whole bunch of stuff for them. This was early days still of the internet. Let's see, 12. We're in like the early 90s here. There was no high-speed internet. Video streaming wasn't really a thing because no one had high-speed internet connections anyways. How are you going to stream this video, even if it was a thing? And where the cameras were, there was no internet connection to. So we had to use a radio transmitter to send the video signal back to one point in town that had a T1 connection, where we would upload to a centralized server. And then originally we were serving the video out as a progressive JPEG. So JPEGs, images, have this feature where they can show you a lower resolution version to show you something really quickly and then gradually load higher and higher. And so you can trick that into having basically an image that never finishes loading. And we would do that to show you like staggered frames of the video from the beach so you could like check out what the waves are doing. So that was the tech of the day. And worked there for the next couple of years. And from that point on was always working for some sort of tech startup. Post college, I spent the next, now it's like 20 plus years working in tech. Had pretty much every job from a software engineering perspective. I've been on the front end team. I've been on the back end team, been an associate engineer, mid-level engineer, senior engineer, team lead, director, manager, senior manager, VP, senior VP, CTO, and VP of AI, all in there. The last 10 of those years have been heavily in leadership roles. And the last maybe 6-7 of those, that leadership has been heavily aligned with AI. I've always had a passion for, I'd say it started with automation. That was one of the novelties of computers and technology. The idea, and I could also simplify that down to leverage. The idea that you press one button and all of these things magically happen. And I think that started with automation, the idea of automation, and then expanded into AI. I did attend graduate school at Georgia Tech, where I got my specialization was in artificial intelligence and machine learning. So there was my formal introduction to it, but I've been, obsessed with it for quite some time now. And that's what I usually tell the random recruiter.
And then I'm supposed to say, all right, well, let's dig into a couple of those roles. And I don't think I've heard much of that story, despite the fact that, and I know we've mentioned this on a couple of the episodes, you used to be my boss.
Oh, yeah. I forgot
during
about
that VP of AI.
Yeah, I actually, because I knew we might be talking about ourselves in this episode, I went back. I was like, do I have any notes on Daniel? And I found one note, because most of the stuff is not on. This is my personal computer, and we don't work there anymore, so I don't have my work notes. But I wrote. This was on January 5th in 2021. I wrote, Daniel Bishop, good communicator and presenter. I would fathom to say he likes to present. I think this was around the time you were interviewing. Did those dates roughly line up?
Yeah, that's right around the time that I was interviewing for that company. And I remember there was a group presentation where I had to go over something that I had previously done. And you were right. I do like to present. And cut to a few years later, here we are talking together.
It's a big presentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's That's my highlight. Do you have an interview spiel? Do you when you do interviews, is it kind of like the same talk you give every time, or do you tailor it?
I usually start at college for the sake of
brevity.
If I'm talking to any interviewer,
you don't start at age 3.
No, I am going, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to start earlier. But usually for the interviewers, I start at college, because if I'm talking to one interviewer, I'm going to be talking to a whole bunch of them. And so we're doing half-hour chunks, and I'm just plopping out that same spiel over and over again. All right. But yeah, I think we can wind things a little farther back, and I'll spend less time talking about specific company names and the deliverables at each one. Let's keep it a little broader. So in my way back, not starting at age 3, but precocious young scamp, sub 6 years old. Nope. Sub 9 years old, because of where I lived at the time. My mother was I think adjunct professor, or she taught 1 or 2 classes at a community college, not terribly far from where we lived. Let it go on the record, here and forever, I love my mother dearly. It's been noted. She is not great with technology, is I think just the follow-up. So I'm about to dunk on my mom just a little bit here, but please know it comes from a place of love. I came with her to her place of work, and she had an office with a desk and computer on it and so on. And she was telling me, not complaining so much as lamenting the fact that she didn't even know how to turn the thing on. And this is in the early to mid 90s. And it was an old computer. I do not remember the specific computer, but it was when beige was still the appropriate color to have computers in.
Is this DOS era, or are we in Windows? I
think we're in
3.1, 95.
I don't think this would have been 95, because I lived there 90. Yeah, somewhere in the 93 to 96 range.
Okay, so probably a 3.1.
I think so, yeah.
We'll go with that.
And I had, I guess via school, probably, been exposed to computers, and this, I think, was the genesis of, I'm good with technology. And so I just inherently
I played Oregon Trail.
I reached behind the computer and there was the switch behind on the right. I can almost remember seeing it and feeling it and giving it a flick. Thing comes on, and my mom was astonished. And she's like, how did you know how to do that? I just do. And I think ever since then, I've been good with technology. Not necessarily a wunderkind who's going on the news and forming surfing companies at the age of 12. But I was good with technology. And so I think really the next bit of note is in the high school days. I remembered that I was taking a geometry class, and then basically the same story also, but a couple years later in statistics. I had a TI-86, which sounds like a very aged piece of technology, except they're not really updating those things. You could still get a TI-86 or maybe 89, that really hasn't marched too far forward, and they're still selling them for the same price. Good for Texas Instruments.
I feel like I started with the 82. Then the 83. There were a lot of
83 pluses going around at the time. I had an 86 for whatever reason.
I think I ended with an 89, which was really next level from what I recall. And then there was the one kid with maybe a TI 93. That was one that was it almost looked like a little mini computer.
We were not allowed to have the 93s.
Yeah, it wasn't allowed on any of the standardized tests, which is why I didn't invest. But I do remember the dude in school with the 93.
Yep. So I had an 86, and then I think I ended on an 89. And if you go on ticalc.org to this day, or at least as of about 1 year ago, last time I checked, and you search for Daniel Bishop, there's 2 of them. One of whom is a prolific, there's a lot of stuff from this person. I'm not that guy. There's another Daniel Bishop, me, who completely self-taught. I just downloaded some basic programs. It was called basic, not like the actual basic programming language. It was the Texas Instruments calculator basic language, whatever. Utterly self-taught. Not a single person to teach me anything, not a single online anything. I was literally just downloading other games in basic and changing variables and understanding oh, this is how this works. I didn't know what a variable was. I didn't know anything about conditionals and this, like all of the basics were completely foreign to me. I just saw stuff, changed things, figured out how it worked, emulated it, and eventually got to the point where I was making my own thing. So I made a couple of games, if you can call it that, and you can barely. But what was more important is that I learned that you could, like you said, automate things with it, or you can make tools with this. And that's what really got me hooked. Where in geometry, I learned everything that I needed to, and I made some first forays into understanding how these things worked. With the 89, though, and once I was in that statistics class, I found out that I didn't have to learn anything. I just had to know just enough to get the calculator program that could do these kinds of problems. And it was just like form filling type things. I got and deserved a D in that class, except for any time that we were able to use those calculators on all my like take homes and everything. Not doing so great. Anytime the tests came out, like, oh great, we're getting to use these things, I was killing it.
Yeah, so, I think, and we may have discussed this in a previous episode. I may have mentioned it, but when I was in high school in the era when teachers didn't yet understand the capability of these calculators, and so I would literally go into my history test and ask them, "Is it okay if I use my calculator?" And they'd look at me a little funny, but they'd say yes, and it was full of just notes.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I don't know if you, and again, another random story, I don't want to get back to your story, but there was an article on Hacker News the other day about someone who's hacked I think it was an 86, where first it appears completely normal, but then they put a chip in the back and has a Bluetooth connection to their phone, and it is a chat window with ChatGPT, so they can literally ask it anything on an exam.
And they can fake reset. Like, I think because they make you like hard reset your calculator.
Well, they didn't do that when I was
saved on it.
Taking the SATs, but apparently that's a thing now.
Yep. And so you can fake that, but now you've got ChatGPT and so on, just right at your fingertips, which is...
Back to your story.
I'm a recruiter. That is a wild piece of tech. So, speaking of entrepreneurs, so from there, I went to college and programming dropped off of my radar for a few years. I worked at the University of Florida's computing help desk. I was still associated with computers. I was good with them. I helped people fix theirs for money. So I did
the help desk too at college. I was the person in the dorm that you would come to like ask the questions of.
I had I was at an office, with desks and everything. It was great. I was mostly resetting passwords. That was about 80% of my calls.
I was mostly dealing with crying. It was more women than men who had lost their papers that they've written, and they would like knock on my door at 2:00 in the morning because I hit save. It's not there. Fix it. And I never could. I hit save.
Yep. Right. So the UF Computing Help Desk, I worked my way up to the consultant level instead of the associate whatever level. So I was actually fixing real problems with computers instead of just like password resets or information lookup. The last semester that I was at UF, I was taking linguistics classes. I graduated with a degree in linguistics. I love linguistics.
Define linguistics. I don't even know that I could give like a great definition right now if you told me. So give
the
me
study of language, of like how we communicate. It isn't learn 5 languages. One of the arguably the most famous linguist, Noam Chomsky, just speaks the one language, English. So you don't have to speak a bunch of languages to be a linguist. It's understanding how we communicate and being able to show with things like X-bar theory or whatever. This is like how syntax works, not just here's how you're supposed to put together a sentence in English, but like we've started to try and figure out, depending on who you talk to and the theories that you ascribe to, like, is there an underlying universal reality to like how all grammar kind of works? Are there certain constraints, or for certain languages, why can you in Swahili have the NG sound like in song start a word, but you can't do that in English? there's very specific reasons for these kinds of things. And why is English so messed up? It isn't just because a bunch of other languages kind of beat it up and mushed together over the years, though that has a lot to do with it. There's also very specific things in the phonology realm of like, here's the underlying representation of a word, and then a bunch of rules that apply in a specific order that make room for other rules or would keep a different rule from going. And that's how you get the surface form of the word. Fascinating field. I love linguistics, and I was taking my linguistics classes last semester at the University of Florida. They were doing a pilot program for computational linguistics, and I said, ooh, I'm in linguistics and like computers. What's that? It was being a first shot at a course, a little on the rough side, but it was absolutely enough to tell me this is what I want to do with my life. You know, in college, I started as a business major. Like, I want to do business someday. Business. That didn't work out so great. I was not enjoying myself. I switched. Linguistics was definitely appealing to me. I really had a lot of passion for the subject and this realm that it was associated with. And then computational linguistics. Oh boy, that was way up my alley. So off I went to Indiana University, Bloomington, got me an MA for a couple of years. I almost had programming beaten out of me while I was there. Not from the linguistics side of things and not from the computational linguistics courses that I took. My professors there, really loved working with them. It was a Java class that I took. Not to dunk on the Java language. People like to use it as a punching
static
bag.
Void main.
Yep. As opposed to just print hello world in Python, for example. So not to dunk on the language itself too much. It was the teacher. Everyone's had teachers that are good teachers and bad teachers in their sort of educational history. This was one of the two worst that I've ever had, easily. There was almost an uprising toward the end of the year whenever the teacher has to leave the room and everyone's filling out the forms. It nearly descended into chaos and people very much voicing their minds of what they were putting for how effective of a teacher this person was. So nearly had the love of programming beaten out of me via a Java class, but not quite. Graduated, got me some big boy jobs, and then over the course of the next now over decade, I've been in computational linguistics specifically, with the occasional adjacent sort of bout ever since. I started in government contracting. Never again, thank you very much. And mostly small to kind of medium-sized companies. Yeah. I've never worked for like a Microsoft or any of them. So nothing huge outside of the first one. You know, government contract. I was the tiniest cog in the biggest machine. I did not enjoy not being able to get much done there. But ever since then, I've liked the smaller companies where I'm able to make more of a difference. And like yourself, I've had a bunch of different kinds of roles, usually under the flags of like computational linguist or data scientist or machine learning engineer, and then senior ML, lead ML. We were angling more toward a managerial route whenever you and I were last working together, whenever circumstances led to a great many people, I think, leaving kind of around the same time. We're not going to delve too far into that, but I have continued more along that sort of managerial track while keeping my hands messy with some code now and then since. And it is something that I continue to be passionate about to this day. So it's less of the I've done back end and done front end. I've really been laser focused into natural language processing ever since. And I've lived through two major revolutions in the space with the advent of transformers. For anyone listening, if the name BERT doesn't just immediately bring a Sesame Street character to mind, BERT and its ilk
and his 512 tokens.
Yeah, that was this first gigantic shift. I mean, depending on who you ask, you could say there's other minor revolutions along the way. It was not the first neural network based NLP approach out there, but I think BERT was like the titanic shift in the industry. Things that were basically impossible started becoming rather possible, or a lot more doable, or easier at the very least. Yeah,
that's something I think a lot of people don't know, is that the AI really started in like the 70s, and maybe you could even say like the 60s. It's just we didn't have the compute back then, and so they quickly hit their limits.
Yeah. So BERT was 2018. I'd already been in the industry for a few years then. Actually, well, on the history side of things, you could say that computational linguistics probably started in World War II, before there were really real computers, by our sort of modern standing
stuff, or something else.
The idea was the U.S. government had Russian and German intercepted or otherwise acquired communiques and wanted to translate them. Machine translation was basically the first, depending on how you look at it, set of NLP tasks undertaken in any real serious capacity. And the U.S. government was of the mind that, like, people speak this and speak this. Give it 6 months. We'll throw some researchers at it. Machine translation will be a solved problem. As you and I and everyone else knows, no, it is not. And no, it had not been. Things are pretty good for languages that have a lot of text to have learned from at this point. Google Translate does a pretty good job, for example, for a lot of the more popular languages of the world. But it was definitely not we'll just give it 6 months and it's basically just dictionary lookups and form filling and then you're done. So BERT was 2018. I'd already been in the industry for about half a decade at this point. Wow, this changes everything. Look at all the stuff that we're able to do now. And then just a few years ago, large language models. You could, I guess, say that BERT is a large language model, or at least a language model. Depends on where you really start to think of things as large. But when GPT-3, I think, was first released, I'd heard the stories about 2 being too dangerous to let out. And, OpenAI was still something that was not a household name, other than the occasional news article of like, just we're trying to build hype by saying this is too dangerous to let out. GPT-2, not
2018, 2019, when I first started playing with the LLMs, being like, hey, there's something
2019. Here. Yeah. I think that is right around the age that these things became available in some sort of way. GPT-3 was released in June 2020. And so before that, like, there were some things that were becoming available, but certainly not with the ease and with the widespread adoption that they are now. So really starting in 2020
there used to be
where this next revolution happened.
When you were using the early versions of GPT, you would it was more of like a sentence completion thing. You would write the beginning of a sentence and then it would complete that into, a paragraph. And then you would run that sentence completion maybe 50 times to get something that was kind of sounding suggestive of a human, although it was like not wildly far from great, but at the time, super impressive.
If you really put the blinders on and looked at like 3 words at a time, like, okay, yeah, that could be, sure, this could be a clause in a sentence, but as soon as you start looking farther out, it got bad. And frankly, the exact same phenomenon still exists. You just have to look farther and farther and farther out.
That's true, yeah. We turn into complete nonsense after like five sentences, 6 sentences. You might get that out, and then it's just garbage.
So we're going to post a link in the show notes. I think you should all take a look at this site. It is very cool. It's called AI Weirdness, and the weirdness has definitely changed over the years. But in the early days, at least when I first started paying attention to this site, the author was looking at like some early neural networks where it was next character prediction, which now we're mostly working with next token type prediction for our large language models, but way pre LLM days, where you would give it, here's every bird name. Now make up some fun new bird names. And it would come up with some fairly realistic sounding bird names or Pokemon names or this is or that's. And having been inspired by that when I was in grad school, my first project, and I really do say that in quotation marks, but my first like end-to-end thing that I thought of and made like runnable in Python, very early days, in the 101 type class, was a Taco Bell food name generator where I did something. It wasn't neural network based. It was just, I took a look at every, Taco Bell just has like on one of their sites somewhere, here's all the food that we have. And so I copied every food name and, it's X layer burrito or this or that. And so I took and just made like a Mad Lib style. You can have a N layer whatever, or you can have the spicy something or the something crunch, or, like there were certain words that could be prefixes or suffixes, but then the chalupa or taco or this or that, like the vaguely Spanish sounding core name of the thing. I just had a bunch of syllables that could be initial syllables, median or such syllables, and final syllables. And it would just put together something with some basic rules of how long it was allowed to be and how many layers it was allowed to be deep or this or that. And frankly, some of the things that spat out absolutely looked like something Taco Bell would sell you. But no AI in that.
Now, any background in podcasting or radio or the voice arts?
I've been told many times at this point, not to toot my own horn, just it has happened, that I have a voice for radio. Fortunately, very few people have said I have a face for radio. But people have said I have a voice for radio. The closest thing to a podcast until this, and like I've been a guest on 2-ish podcasts for one episode previous to this. But the closest thing to that is some jobs ago at one of the really little ones, they had a phone system, a simple one of just, if you want to talk to sales, press 1. If you want to talk to whoever, press 2. And for whatever reason, they wanted to use a person at the company to record that. And long story short, they picked me. So I was the official voice of a company for their phone system. Yeah, I think that's really the only exposure to like recording for a medium that I had. And that was well into my like career. I hadn't been doing pirate radio or anything like that when I was younger. How about you? When did you start podcasting? Is this your first podcast?
No.
Is this your second podcast?
The first podcast I did was in high school. It was published as Real Media Files for the Real Player. That's what we streamed it on.
Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
It was me and a buddy. We would talk about technology and just rip on each other for like an hour a week. I so wish I could find these files. I have a lot of my old hard drives and stuff. I can't find them. It was popular in my school. I don't think it ever got outside of that reach. But I loved radio from like a very early age. I loved AM radio. I would listen to AM radio every night. I also loved like old radio shows where they put on plays on the radio. I just thought it was like super cool that I could just like sit there and like now it seems stupid, but at the time it did not seem stupid to me. And then I don't know, I like Howard Stern. That's a cool guy.
Yeah.
Who else? Yeah, Loveline, Dr. Drew, and Adam Carolla.
You wanted to do your own Loveline.
I don't know, but like I really loved radio and that format. In college, I worked at the college radio station. Although it wasn't the college radio station, it was like a local radio station that had affiliation with the college. I was the morning news guy, so I would do the morning news. Now they fired me. Well, technically they didn't ask me back. We had to have a meeting.
An early retirement.
Yeah, we had a meeting about them not asking me back.
Okay.
Their complaint was that I made everything too doom and gloom. They're like, whatever story you're reading, it just sounds very dramatic, Hunter.
I've definitely not noticed any of that with the episodes we've been going through. Okay.
I've done some this is like in college stuff and maybe a little bit outside of college, some voiceover work, but just a little bit.
Voiceover work. Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe I should record an audiobook. Get in the comments and let me know if I should.
I had another podcast, which is out there. You can still find it, called One with Hunter Powers. If you go to one.hunterpowers.com, I believe you can still find it. I think there were 40 some episodes there where I picked a random topic and ruminated on it. I have not gone back to listen to that. Maybe it's horrible. And I when podcasts came around, I loved podcasts because they brought all of this diverse radio material for all these different topics. Oh, another of my favorite podcasts, going back to the high school era that still exists today, was a program called Off the Hook, which has there's this zine I think I mentioned on the show before. I got a stack of them up there called 2600 The Hacker Quarterly. You used to be able to like buy them in Barnes and Noble and like read about secrets of hacking into systems. And the editor of that magazine, who goes by the name Emmanuel Goldstein, he hosts the show Off the Hook on WBAY in New York. And they would stream it live over Real Media, which is probably why I did my podcast in Real Media. And they turned that into a podcast. And again, I'm like 99% sure I don't really listen to that much these days. It is still on today. So that was some of the inspiration. And then I wanted to do another podcast, but I wanted to have a co-host this time. I did not like the one with Hunter Experience where it was just me talking into the camera. I don't know, that it didn't do it for me. So yeah, I pitched Daniel on like, hey, I should do something. And we went back and forth a little bit and figured out the idea for the show, which is still evolving. I don't think we're at the end product yet. And maybe we should never be at the end product. It's one of the things we like is iterating in this technology world. But here we are today on our journey to self-awareness.
I do want to say, as just a quick tail end to that, there is another podcast that I used to run with a friend back in the, I think like high school days.
Nice.
It is. I fortunately don't remember the name. I remember that I'd be horribly embarrassed if it ever was resurfaced.
All right, you internet sleuths.
Yep. It was me and one friend affecting vaguely British accents and just like kind of making up our own whole, I don't know if it was like almost a soap opera style, just here's the world that we're in and the dramas that our characters are going through.
I know what I'm doing the rest of the day.
Oh, no. I hope it never sees the light of day.
Were you the person hacking the Internet Archive the other day to try to get it off there?
Trying to just get rid of that for once and all. No, I hadn't thought of that in years until we just started talking about podcasting. At first, go back and listen a few minutes ago. I said that this was the first podcast that I'd like done. I believed that to be true at the time. I have now since remembered there is that one other super embarrassing one from a long time ago. Well, please no one find it.
Now all you listeners know a little bit about our journey as we go on this journey together here
self-awareness
on episode 42. The answer to life, the universe, and everything, right here on They Might Be Self-Aware. If you like what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment. It's much appreciated, every single one. We try to reply to everyone. And if you didn't like this episode, just wait till next episode. We'll be back to the normal tech talk, jabber, AI content. And yeah, subscribe wherever you like. You can watch us. You want to see those... Oh, I'm not going to call them pretty. They might be faces for radio on YouTube, or just be safe and stick to the audio versions on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever.
Or read the transcripts.
Oh yeah, the transcripts. They're interesting. Mm-hmm. If that's you're a reader, you can always go there.
You can take the transcript and put it into the Google Notebook LM and get a podcast about our podcast.
Yeah, we did do that once. Yeah,
that's pretty meta. Yeah. You could always do that.
The choice is up to you. As long as you're here with us, we're okay with whatever you decide. And until next time,
they might be self-aware.